I never thought the day would come when my own daughter-in-law would look me straight in the eye and say, "You're not coming this trip's for my family." She said it right there in my kitchen while holding the credit card I paid for. She didn't know it, but the family vacation she was bragging about was booked at my resort. A 5-star oceanfront paradise I secretly own. For years, I've been quiet, the woman who stocked grocery shelves, baked casseroles, and smiled through every insult. But when Lena used my money to erase me from my own family, something inside me snapped. So I packed my bags, drove to Seaside Haven, and checked in under a different name. I watched her strut through the lobby, acting like she owned the world until she found out whose name was on the deed. What happened next made her face turn white as the resort's marble floors. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll see exactly how a humble grandmother taught her classy daughter-in-law the most unforgettable lesson of her life. My name is Diane Miller. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent most of my life behind the counter of a small grocery store on the Maine coast. People around here know me for my pies, my patience, and the way I remember everyone's name. After my husband Paul passed away 15 years ago, the store became my world. It kept my hands busy, my mind occupied, and my heart steady. I never made much money, but I built a quiet kind of life, one I was proud of. That's why it surprised me how quickly everything I'd built could feel so small, just from a few careless words. It was a Thursday afternoon, late spring. The air still had that edge of salt and chill that seeps into your bones this time of year. I was restocking the coffee shelf when I saw David's car pull up outside. My son doesn't come by much since he married Lena. They live 2 towns over in a neighborhood where all the houses look the same, and everyone hires someone else to mow their lawn. Still, I wiped my hands on my apron and felt a flutter of joy at the sight of them through the window. My boy. My family. They came in together looking every bit the modern couple. David in his pressed shirt, Lena in one of those silky blouses that never wrinkle. She always looked out of place among my wooden shelves and handwritten price tags, like she was just visiting from a better world. She greeted me with that tight smile of hers, the kind that doesn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Diane," she said, setting her designer purse on the counter like it might catch something if it touched the floor. "We wanted to tell you some news." I felt a spark of excitement. Maybe something happy, an anniversary trip, maybe even a baby. "Well, now that sounds wonderful," I said, folding my hands. "What's the occasion?" David smiled at her, letting her take the lead. That's how it always was. Lena liked to do the talking, and David, he'd learned not to interrupt. "It's about our vacation," she said, her voice bright and crisp. "We're finally doing a family trip this summer, a real getaway. I could picture it instantly, beach chairs, grandkids. Well, someday, maybe even a big house we'd rent together." I smiled. "That sounds just lovely, Lena." "When do we leave?" For a moment, her smile froze. Then she tilted her head slightly as if she were talking to someone slow to catch on. "Oh, it's a family trip," she said. "But I meant my family, my parents, my sister, and David." The words didn't quite land at first. "My family. Not yours." My heart stuttered, but I kept my face still. "I see," I said softly. "So it's the Carter's trip then?" Her tone didn't soften. If anything, she seemed relieved that I'd understood without forcing her to explain. "Exactly," she said. "We've been planning it for months. It's just easier this way, you know. Different generations, different lifestyles. Different lifestyles." I glanced at her nails, long polished, probably cost more than my week's groceries, and then at my own hands, lined and rough from years of carrying boxes and slicing bread. I felt that old ache in my knuckles. Arthritis, the doctor calls it. I call it a reminder of everything I've worked for. David cleared his throat. Mom, it's just a quick getaway, he said, not meeting my eyes. We'll plan something with you later. I wanted to say something that would make them stop and realize how cruel this was, but the words wouldn't come. I saw how Lena's arm brushed against his, how proud she looked, how certain she was that she belonged somewhere I didn't. And I thought about all the little things I'd done for them over the years, the checks for emergencies, the dinners I sent home in foil trays, the loan I gave when David said his car broke down. I'd never asked for thanks, but I'd also never imagined being told I didn't belong in my own family, so I smiled. The kind of smile you use to stop yourself from crying. Then have a lovely time, I said. You deserve it. Lena beamed, misunderstanding my calm for approval. We will, she said. It's going to be amazing. Seaside Haven Resort. 5 stars, oceanfront private villas. You should see the pictures, I nodded. Sounds beautiful. After they left, the bell over the door jingled one last time, and the quiet that followed felt heavy. I stood behind the counter, surrounded by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the scent of coffee grounds. For a while, I just stood there, tracing the ring Paul once wore that now hung from a chain around my neck. He would have known what to say, he always did. When I finally closed up shop that evening, the loneliness settled in like fog over the harbor. I poured myself some tea and sat by the kitchen window, staring at the ledger book I kept out of habit. I balanced it every week, even though there was more money in my accounts than anyone realized. That's when I saw it, a charge I didn't recognize. My eyes narrowed and I leaned closer. Seaside Haven Resort. The amount was large enough to make my stomach drop. Then I saw the date and the card number. Not mine, the supplementary card I'd given David years ago, just in case. My hands trembled as I turned the page. The payment had gone through that morning. The vacation Lena had bragged about, the one I'd been excluded from, had been paid for with my money. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the heat rise in my chest. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something colder, sharper. After a long moment, I closed the ledger, poured out the cold tea, and whispered into the quiet kitchen. Well, if it's Seaside Haven, they're going to. A slow smile spread across my face. Maybe I'll take a little vacation too. That thought lingered long after I whispered it into the quiet kitchen. I hadn't said it out of spite, not exactly. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere tired. The house felt smaller that night, like the walls themselves were listening. Outside, the sea wind pushed against the window panes, and the clock over the stove ticked so loudly it filled the silence David and Lena left behind. I didn't sleep much. Instead, I sat at the table with my checkbook, going over every line of my account. At my age, old habits don't die easily. I've balanced that ledger every Saturday since Paul passed away. But this time, I wasn't just looking for order, I was looking for truth. By morning, I knew exactly what to look for. The Seaside Haven charge hadn't been a mistake or a duplicate transaction. It was neatly recorded down to the cent under a card number that wasn't mine, but connected to me. Years ago, when David and Lena were struggling to make ends meet, I'd added him to my credit account just for emergencies. I remember him promising hand over heart he'd never use it without asking. I suppose some promises age badly. I drove over to Helen's place after breakfast. Helen's my neighbor, my best friend, and the kind of woman who can spot nonsense before it's spoken. Her front porch smelled of coffee and lilacs, and she was already outside clipping dead blooms from her planters. I must have looked shaken because she didn't bother with a good morning. She just set her shears down and said, "All right, what happened?" I handed her the statement. She slipped her glasses on, squinted, then let out a low whistle. Seaside Haven Resort. Oh, Lord above, they used your card for this. I nodded. David's card, the one I kept open for emergencies. Her jaw tightened. They used your money to leave you behind. Hearing it said out loud like that, it stung worse. I gave a weak smile, trying to ease the weight of it. Guess I just paid for my own exclusion, I said. There's irony for you. Helen dropped into her chair with a huff. No, there's cruelty. That girl doesn't deserve your patience, Diane. And your boy, well, he should have known better. I think he does, I said softly. He just doesn't know how to stand up to her. Helen sighed, folding her arms. Men can be blind to their wives' sharp edges. You raised him kind, and kindness can turn into weakness if you're not careful. I didn't argue. Instead, I watched a seagull glide across the cloudy sky and thought about all the years I'd worked morning to night 6 days a week to make sure David never went hungry, never felt the cold bite of worry I'd known as a young widow. Everything I'd done for him. Helen must have read my mind because her tone softened. You know what you ought to do. What's that? Go somewhere people actually respect you. Somewhere you're not invisible. I gave a small laugh. At my age, respect's as rare as cheap gas. She leaned forward. I'm serious, Diane. Take a trip. Not to spite them, but for yourself. You've spent your life looking after everyone else. It's time you look after you. The idea sat there between us, warm and wild. I hadn't gone anywhere since Paul's funeral. Vacations were for other people, people with softer hands and fewer worries. Still, Helen's words wouldn't leave me. That evening after closing the store, I went back to my kitchen and pulled an old tin box from the cabinet above the fridge. Inside were my papers, savings accounts, insurance forms, tax receipts, and a few investment statements I hadn't looked at in years. It took me a while to find the right one. The paper was yellowed at the edges. The print faint, but I remembered it as clear as day. 15 years ago, right after Paul died, a man named Thomas Green came into my store. He'd been the general manager of a struggling coastal resort seaside haven, though it had another name back then. He needed investors to keep it alive. I'd been saving for David's future, but the way Thomas spoke about rebuilding something honest and local, it stirred something in me. I invested quietly through a holding account under the condition that my name wouldn't be public. Over the years, Thomas sent polite quarterly updates, just numbers and progress notes. I'd skimmed them, trusted him, and tucked them away again, until now. I unfolded the document and read through the lines carefully. Ownership agreement revised 15 years ago. Silent investor 100% equity transfer upon debt clearance. My eyes traveled to the bottom where a single name was typed in block letters beside a faded signature. I leaned closer, tracing the letters with my fingertip, as if they might vanish. Seaside Haven Resort. Owner, Diane Miller. For a long moment, I couldn't move. It was like the room itself had gone still, the refrigerator hum fading the ticking clock, pausing just long enough for my breath to catch. I'd almost forgotten that part of my life, the quiet risk I took when everyone thought I was done taking chances. And here, it was waiting as if time itself had been holding its breath for me to remember. Helen's words echoed in my head. Go somewhere people actually respect you. A slow smile crept across my face. Maybe I didn't need to go looking for that place. Maybe I already owned it. The words echoed in my head long after I'd said them. I sat there at my kitchen table, the ownership document spread out before me like some relic I'd unearthed from another life. The ink had faded, the paper yellowed, but my name stood there solid real. Diane Miller, owner. It felt strange. For years, I'd thought of myself as ordinary. The woman who ran a grocery store, who counted every penny, who smiled politely, while others spoke over her. But now, staring at those words, I realized that somewhere along the line, I had built something far bigger than I ever let myself believe. I spent the next morning walking along the harbor, trying to make sense of it all. The gulls circled above the water, crying out over the wind, and the tide rolled in heavy and gray. 15 years ago, I'd stood in this same spot with Thomas Green. He'd been younger then, though still with that patient, serious look he carried like a second skin. He was managing Seaside Haven at the time, a resort on the verge of collapse. The owners had vanished, the staff hadn't been paid, and the locals were ready to see it bulldozed. He'd come to my store desperate for backing. I remember laughing when he asked, "Me, a grocery clerk helping save a resort." But there was something in the way he talked about it. He said, "This place has good bones, Diane. It just needs someone who believes in it." And that word believe stuck. I'd lost Paul that year, lost the certainty of what came next. So I took what little I had, and I believed. I invested quietly through Thomas under a shell account, so my name wouldn't appear anywhere public. At first, it felt foolish. For months, I didn't tell a soul. Then, the quarterly updates started coming in small profits, at first, then larger ones. Thomas wrote faithfully every 3 months, sending photos of new construction handwritten notes, thanking me for the trust I'd placed in him. I'd tuck the papers into my tin box and go back to work at the store. I never told David. I wanted my life to stay simple. Later that day, I called Helen and asked if she had a few minutes to talk. She came over with her coffee mug in hand, wearing that curious expression she gets when she knows there's gossip brewing. I handed her the document. She looked at it for a long time, lips parted in disbelief. "Well, I'll be," she said finally. "Diane Miller, secret businesswoman. You really do own the place." "I suppose I do," I said, though it still felt strange to admit. She leaned back in her chair, studying me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Why in heaven's name did you keep this a secret all these years?" I took a deep breath. People change when they think you're rich. They treat you like a stranger or worse, a trophy. I've seen it happen. I didn't want that. I wanted people to talk to me because they liked me, not because they wanted something. Helen nodded slowly. "You've always been the modest kind. But Diane, maybe it's time you stop hiding behind that grocery counter. You built something. You should stand in it." Her words sat heavy but kind. I looked down at my hands, the ones that had carried boxes, counted change-baked casseroles for fundraisers. The knuckles were swollen but steady. These hands had built a life ordinary, yes, but honest. And maybe, just maybe, they'd built something extraordinary too. That night after closing the store, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and thought about Lena. Her words still echoed. "You're not coming. This trip's for my family." I imagined her stepping into that resort, tossing her hair, pretending she belonged to some higher world. I felt no fury, just a quiet resolve. For years, I'd let other people define who I was. Maybe it was time I reminded them what real strength looked like. I picked up the phone and called Thomas. It had been a while since we'd spoken, but his voice hadn't changed, steady, respectful. "Mrs. Miller," he said warmly, "it's been too long." "To what do I owe the pleasure, Thomas?" I said, "I think it's time I visited Seaside Haven." There was a short silence. "Of course, we'd be honored. When should I expect you?" I hesitated. "I'd like to come quietly. No one should know who I am. Let's keep it between us as it's always been." He understood immediately. "Understood, ma'am. How shall I register your room?" I looked down at my tea, then smiled. "Mrs. Wilson." "That'll do just fine." "Very well," he said. "We'll have everything ready." After hanging up, I sat for a long moment, listening to the clock tick and the sea hum beyond the window. I felt something stir inside me. Not anger, not pride, but a calm determination. The same quiet courage that had carried me through Paul's death, through raising David alone, through every long night at the store. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning a lesson. The next day, I packed a small suitcase. I chose plain clothes, nothing fancy, but I ironed them carefully. As I zipped the bag shut, the phone rang again. I recognized Thomas's number. Wilson. He began using the name as if we'd rehearsed it for years. His tone carried a note of hesitation. There's something you should know. What's that? I asked. He cleared his throat. Your son and daughter-in-law will be checking in this Friday. For a moment, I said nothing. The sound of the waves outside filled the silence. Then I smiled, slow, deliberate. Well then, I said softly, I suppose I'll see them there. The line replayed in my head the next morning as I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, brushing my hair into a neat bun. The woman staring back at me looked ordinary, simple cardigan, sensible shoes. Travel bag packed with more practicality than style. But behind those tired eyes was a spark I hadn't felt in years. Not anger exactly, but purpose. For the first time since Paul passed, I had something that was just mine again, something that reminded me who I used to be before life became a routine of grocery aisles and ledger books. By noon, I was on the road to Seaside Haven. The highway wound along the coast, the ocean flashing silver through the pines. As I drove, I thought about how strange it felt to be going there under an alias, to walk into a place I owned pretending I was someone else. But that was how it had to be. I wanted to see things clearly, to know how people behaved when they didn't know who they were talking to. The resort came into view just as the late afternoon sun dipped behind the dunes. It was more beautiful than I remembered from the old photographs Thomas used to send sleek white buildings, glass balconies catching the light flowers, arranged in careful bursts of color. A valet opened my door, his uniform crisp, his smile automatic. Welcome to Seaside Haven, ma'am. Checking in. Yes, I said, steadying my voice. Mrs. Wilson. He nodded and led me inside, where the lobby gleamed like a pearl. Marble floors, chandeliers shaped like waves, the faint scent of salt and lemon in the air. A young woman behind the desk looked up startled, then immediately straightened her jacket. Good afternoon, Mrs. Wilson, she said quickly, her tone oddly formal. We've been expecting you. Have you now? I asked, amused. The girl's smile tightened. Of course. Mr. Green said you'd be arriving early. I hope your journey was pleasant. Something in her tone, careful, deferential, made me realize what had happened. They thought I was a corporate inspector, someone from headquarters evaluating staff performance. I decided not to correct her. The drive was fine, I said. You run a fine-looking place. Her face relaxed a little, and she offered to show me to my suite. As we walked through the lobby, my eyes caught on a small, round robot gliding silently across the floor, sucking up invisible bits of dust. I stopped to watch it. Well, I'll be, I said, leaning on my cane. It cleans better than my old broom. The staffer smiled nervously. It's a Roomba. A what? I asked, tilting my head. Sounds like something you'd order at a Mexican restaurant. For a second, she just blinked, then let out a laugh she'd been holding back. I laughed too, the sound echoing warmly between us. For a moment, I wasn't an inspector or an owner or anyone important. I was just a woman, sharing a small joke in a beautiful place. After I settled into my room, a modest suite, with a view of the dunes, I unpacked and called Thomas. He confirmed what I'd suspected. The staff think you're here for an evaluation, he said, his voice low and amused. I didn't tell them otherwise. Thought it might make things easier. Good thinking, I replied. Let's keep it that way. The next afternoon, I took a slow walk through the resort grounds. Guests lounged by the pool, waiters moved like clockwork, and somewhere down by the cabanas, a live band was playing soft jazz. Everything gleamed. I felt proud, and yet there was something bittersweet about it, knowing I'd built this in silence, never claiming a shred of credit. It was early evening when I saw them. David and Lena stepping out of a black SUV, sunglasses still on, though the sun had already dipped. The valet greeted them with the same polite smile he'd given me, but Lena barely acknowledged him. Her heels clicked sharply across the marble floor, her voice rising as she spoke. "This is the room," she said to the front desk clerk after they checked in. "I requested oceanfront with a soaking tub and private balcony. This looks standard." I was standing near the grand staircase, just far enough away to go unnoticed. The young clerk apologized, explaining that the oceanfront rooms were occupied and they'd been given a deluxe garden suite instead. Deluxe Lena repeated her tone, dripping with disdain. "It feels like a motel with fancier curtains." David shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Lena," he said quietly, "it's fine. We're lucky to be here at all." "Fine," she snapped. "You call this fine?" He sighed. "That's not okay, Lena." Her head jerked toward him. "Oh, here we go. You always take everyone's side but mine." The argument drew a few glances from other guests, and the clerk looked near tears. David ran a hand through his hair, murmured something I couldn't catch, and finally guided Lena toward the elevators. I stayed where I was, heart tight. There was my son, the boy who used to bring me seashells from the tide pools, now a man who'd forgotten what it meant to speak up for what mattered. And there was Lena, more brittle than ever, mistaking arrogance for confidence. Later that evening, after dinner in my suite, I stepped out onto my balcony. The night air was cool, the ocean dark and restless beneath the moonlight. Below, the staff were clearing tables from an event on the terrace. I leaned on the railing, breathing in the salt air, when a sharp, familiar voice broke through the sound of the waves. "Lena." She was standing near the pool, snapping at a young woman in uniform. The girl couldn't have been older than 20, holding a tray of glasses that trembled in her hands as Lena gestured angrily. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The scene told me everything. I straightened, gripping the railing. The hum of the ocean faded under the rush of blood in my ears. For years I'd stayed quiet, let people mistake my gentleness for weakness. But watching her berate that girl, I felt something settle inside me. Calm. Certain. I finally knew exactly why I was there. The thought stayed with me through the night, settling deeper as the hours passed. The waves outside my window whispered against the shore, steady and certain, as if reminding me that time has its own way of correcting things. I woke early, the sky still gray, and went down to the terrace where the staff were setting up for breakfast. I told myself I was just walking, just looking around, but I think deep down I was waiting to see what kind of woman my daughter-in-law would choose to be when no one important was watching. By the time guests began trickling in, the air had grown soft and bright. I took a seat near the far edge of the patio where I could see everything without being seen. The staff moved briskly, refilling coffee pots, arranging fruit trays, clearing plates. Then I saw her, the young woman from the night before. She carried herself carefully, shoulders drawn, eyes focused on her tray. Even from across the terrace, I could tell she was nervous, still shaken from the scolding she'd received. When Lena appeared, the air shifted. She swept in wearing oversized sunglasses and that crisp tone that always made people shrink. David followed quiet, holding his phone like a shield. They took a table near the center, and before long the girl Paula, her name tag said, walked up to them with coffee. I could almost feel her hands trembling from where I sat. Lena barely looked up. Finally, she said, "Do you have almond milk?" "Not whatever this is." Paula's voice was small but steady. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll check with the kitchen." As she turned to go, Lena's voice cut across the terrace, sharp, loud enough for everyone to hear. Honestly, people like you shouldn't work in a five-star place. You don't belong here if you can't get simple things right. I felt the air leave my lungs. For a moment, it was as if time rolled backward, and I was 30 years younger standing in someone else's kitchen, being told the same thing in different words. The staff froze. David lowered his gaze, pretending to scroll his phone. Paula's face flushed crimson. She nodded quickly and hurried away, her chin tucked down. I could see her bite the inside of her lip to keep it from trembling. When Lena leaned back satisfied, I made myself breathe again. I wanted to march over to say something, but I stopped. Not yet. This wasn't the time for outrage. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come quietly. After breakfast, I waited until the terrace emptied. Then I followed the sound of dishes clattering into the service hallway. Paula stood by the sink, her back to me, wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. I cleared my throat gently so I wouldn't startle her. She turned startled anyway, then straightened. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Guests aren't supposed to be back here." "I'm not a guest," I said softly. "At least not really." "You're Paula, aren't you?" Her eyes widened. "Yes, ma'am. I thought so. Your mother's name is Jean, isn't it, Jean?" "Jenkins." She blinked. "You know my mom? I used to. We were neighbors years ago. You were just a little girl back then, running around barefoot, always chasing the ice cream truck." Recognition flickered in her expression, and then disbelief. "Mrs. Miller," she said quietly. From the store, I smiled. "That's me." Her face softened, and she let out a shaky breath. "I can't believe you remember." "How could I forget?" I said. "Your mother worked herself to the bone, and you used to come by with her on Saturdays. She always made sure you had a piece of candy from the counter." Paula laughed a small sound, but it was the first genuine one I'd heard all day. Then her eyes dropped to the floor again. "I'm sorry you saw what happened out there." I shook my head. "Don't be. You didn't do anything wrong." Her hands fidgeted with her apron strings. "She's just... Some people like that you can't please them." I reached out, resting my hand lightly on her arm. "Listen to me, Paula. Don't let her words decide your worth. You belong here every bit as much as she does, probably more." She nodded, though tears still glistened in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. As she went back to her duties, I lingered a moment longer. My fingers curled around the edge of a counter, and I felt the dull ache of my joints. My knuckles had swollen again, the pain flaring as I flexed them. It was the same pain that had followed me all my life, from scrubbing floors to lifting crates, from long nights behind the cash register to mornings when I couldn't close my hand around a pen. I looked down at them now, those stubborn hands, and I thought of all the years they'd kept going when my heart wanted to stop. Through the open doorway, I caught sight of Lena crossing the lobby, her heels clicking like punctuation marks of pride. She'd grown up with less, I knew that. But somewhere along the way, she'd mistaken pretending for progress. And now, she was taking that shame and turning it outward, cutting down anyone who reminded her of who she used to be. I rubbed my aching fingers and felt a quiet calm settle over me. Not anger, clarity. I couldn't undo what she'd said, but I could make sure she understood what true worth looked like. I'd spent my life teaching lessons to people who thought they already knew everything. Maybe this one would just take a little longer to learn. I turned toward the window, the sunlight spilling across the floor like something alive, and whispered to myself, "Maybe it's time for a little lesson." The words I'd whispered the night before still echoed in my mind as morning light crept through the curtains. It wasn't anger that woke me early, but something quieter and steadier, a purpose I hadn't felt in a long while. I made myself a cup of coffee, savoring the warmth against my palms, and watched the sun lift over the dunes. The ocean beyond the resort shimmered like glass calm on the surface, but powerful underneath. It felt fitting somehow. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to remind someone of things they'd forgotten. After breakfast, I asked Thomas to meet me in the manager's office. He arrived promptly, still carrying that careful professionalism that made him so good at what he did. When I told him I wanted to make a few guest arrangement adjustments, he raised an eyebrow just slightly. For room 302, I said, no upgrades, no extras, no complimentary services. Treat them like everyone else. He hesitated, unsure if he should smile. You're sure, Mrs. Wilson? He asked, still using my alias, even though we both knew the truth behind it. Quite sure, I replied. They came here expecting luxury. I'd rather they experience a little fairness instead. He nodded. As you wish. Anything else? Yes, I said, thinking it through. Send a bottle of our house wine to their room tonight. Include a note. I paused, then added, write this exactly. Respect is the only real luxury. Thomas allowed himself the faintest grin. Understood. By late afternoon, I watched from the terrace as room 302's curtains opened and closed in quick succession. Even from a distance, I could sense Lena's agitation. She'd probably complained about the room already. It didn't face the ocean after all, and the marble tiles weren't polished enough for her taste. I imagined her pacing, criticizing the decor, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. I wondered if she'd seen the note yet. Around dinner time, I saw her emerge from the elevator, her expression sharp as a knife. David trailed a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. They crossed the lobby without speaking, but the tension between them was thick enough to feel from across the room. Lena glanced around like someone trying to spot an enemy in a crowd. Her eyes swept past me and moved on without recognition. That was the thing about people like her. They rarely looked at anyone they didn't think mattered. I spent the evening reading on the balcony, watching the resort hum quietly below. When the phone rang, I answered, expecting Thomas. Instead, it was Helen. You sound different, she said. Lighter somehow. I suppose I am, I said. I've stopped being angry. That's a miracle in itself, she replied. What changed? I realized anger doesn't teach anything, I told her, looking out at the horizon. Sometimes silence teaches louder than words. Helen chuckled. Well, I hope your silence is making someone very nervous. Oh, it is, I said softly. When I hung up, I stayed there a while longer, listening to the rhythm of the ocean and the faint murmur of laughter from the restaurant below. I thought of all the years I'd spent working, how every act of patience had shaped me more than any outburst ever could. People underestimate the power of stillness. They mistake it for weakness. But silence can be a mirror, and some people can't stand to see themselves reflected in it. That night, as I headed to my room, I passed by the corridor leading to room 302. I shouldn't have lingered, but curiosity got the better of me. Their door was slightly ajar. Housekeeping must have just finished the turndown service. Through the small gap, I could hear Lena's voice. I told you something's off, David, she said, her tone low, but tense. The staff keep looking at me. And that note, what kind of hotel does that? It's weird, David's voice came next, calm but weary. It's just a note, Lena. You're reading too much into it. Too much into it, she repeated sharply. You didn't see how that waiter looked at me today, like he knew something, like everyone knows something. I smiled to myself, unseen in the hallway. She wasn't wrong. People did know something. Not everything, not yet, but they sensed a shift. That's the thing about respect. When it's been absent for too long, its return feels like a storm. I took a step back, careful not to make a sound, and turned toward the elevator. I had no intention of confronting her. Not yet. Let her stew. Let her wonder. The best lessons start with confusion. When I reached my room, the phone rang again. I answered, thinking it might be Helen calling to gossip, or Thomas giving an update. But before I could say a word, I heard the soft click of the line connecting, and then silence. "Hello," I said. No answer, but I heard breathing on the other end. Then a man's voice, tentative, familiar. "Mom!" My heart skipped. "David." He hesitated, then spoke again, quieter this time. "I heard you talking to Thomas earlier. About room 302. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, so he'd overheard. The secret I'd held close was suddenly out in the open, if only to him. "David," I said carefully, "you shouldn't eavesdrop on conversations that aren't yours." There was a pause, heavy with confusion. "Why are you talking to the manager? What's going on?" I took a breath, steadying my voice. "Nothing you need to worry about yet." He exhaled sharply. "Mom, please, just tell me what you're doing." I looked out the window at the dark ocean, its surface rippling with faint light, and said softly, "You'll see soon enough." That was the last thing I told David before the line went quiet. I sat for a long time after hanging up, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me. The secret I'd carried for 15 years was no longer just mine. My son had heard enough to know something wasn't right, and if there's one thing I knew about David, it's that he wouldn't let it rest until he had an answer. The next morning, the resort was humming with its usual rhythm, guests at breakfast, staff moving swiftly, the soft sound of ocean waves drifting in through the open windows. I tried to act natural, greeting Thomas briefly in the lobby and checking on a few small details, but I could feel it in the air. The shift. Somewhere in this building, my son was putting the pieces together. It didn't take long for him to find me. I was sitting in the garden courtyard sipping coffee and pretending to read a brochure when his shadow fell across the table. "Mom," he said, his voice low but tense. I looked up slowly, masking the flicker of nerves with a calm smile. "Good morning, David." He didn't sit down. His jaw tightened as he spoke. "You own this place." There it was, no hesitation, no accusation, just a question, heavy with disbelief. I set my cup down, meeting his eyes. "Yes," I said quietly, "I do." He blinked, shaking his head as if he hadn't heard me right. "How long?" 15 years, I said. "Since before it was Seaside Haven, back when it was just a half-empty building with more dust than guests." He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You've been sitting on that kind of money all this time. Why didn't you tell me?" I smiled faintly. "Because it was never about the money, David. I wanted something that belonged to me, something I built without anyone changing how they treated me. People act differently when they think you're rich." He sat down, then his expression softening. "So all those times you said the store was doing just fine?" "It was," I said. "Just not the only thing doing fine." He rubbed his face with his hands, torn between shock and something else. Something like guilt. "And Lena, she doesn't know." I shook my head. "No. And I'd like to keep it that way, at least for now." He leaned forward. "Why, Mom? Why not just tell her? She's been walking around here acting like she owns the place, like everyone else is beneath her. If she knew the truth, she'd change," I said softly, cutting him off. "She'd pretend to be grateful, pretend to be kind. But it wouldn't be real. She needs to see who she is when there's nothing to gain. That's the only way she'll ever learn." David looked down at his hands, silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice lower this time. "She's already showing it." I followed his gaze across the courtyard where Lena stood by the pool, with her phone in hand, scolding a young staff member about a missing towel. Her words carried just enough for me to hear the sharpness in them, the same tone I'd once endured myself from customers who thought money gave them permission to be cruel. "Yes," I said quietly. "She is." He turned back to me. "Mom, this feels like revenge." I met his eyes steadily. "It's not revenge, David. It's a mirror." He frowned. "A mirror." "Yes," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "Revenge makes someone hurt the way they hurt you. But a mirror," I paused, letting the thought form fully. "A mirror makes them see themselves, what they do, how they sound, what they've become. I don't need to humiliate her. I just need her to recognize her reflection." David leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You've changed," he said after a moment. "You sound different." "I'm just tired," I said. "Tired of letting people mistake kindness for weakness. There's power in quiet things, David, in restraint. I learned that the hard way." He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. "What if she doesn't learn? What if she just gets worse? Then that's her burden to carry," I said simply. "But at least she won't be able to say she didn't have a chance to see herself clearly." He looked out across the garden again, the light catching his face in a way that made him look younger, more like the boy I remembered. "You really think she'll ever see it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But sometimes people need to lose their reflection before they start looking for it again." For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft splash of the fountain and the hum of the sea in the distance. I wanted to reach across the table to take his hand like I used to when he was little and afraid, but I didn't. Some moments needed to breathe on their own. Finally, he stood. "You're playing with fire, Mom," he said quietly. Maybe I said, smiling faintly. "But sometimes a little heat is what it takes to melt the ice." He hesitated, then nodded once and walked away, his figure framed by sunlight as he crossed the courtyard. I watched him go, my heart full and heavy at the same time. From where I sat, I could see him stop near the balcony railing. He looked up toward Lena, who was now laughing into her phone, her voice carrying across the pool deck like nothing had happened at all. He stayed there for a long time watching her, his face caught somewhere between love and disappointment. And as I watched him, I realized that for both of them, the lesson was only just beginning. The next morning, that thought still lingered like a tide that refused to roll back. The air felt heavier somehow, the kind of quiet before a storm you can't quite see yet. I went about my routine the same way I always did, coffee on the balcony notes to Thomas about housekeeping details, a short walk through the gardens, but I could feel the tension brewing beneath the calm surface of the resort. There's always a shift in the air before people do something foolish. By late morning, Thomas knocked gently on my suite door. He never knocked twice, and I could tell from his face when I opened it that something was off. "You might want to see this," he said, holding out his phone. I took it, the screen already lit. There, filling the frame, was Lena, my daughter-in-law, standing in the resort lobby, sunglasses perched high on her head, voice dripping with disdain. "This resort," she said, pointing behind her, "is a complete disaster. The service is rude, the rooms are nothing like the pictures, and the staff act like they're doing you a favor just by showing up. Honestly, it's a joke. Don't waste your money here." She smiled, that tight, performative smile I'd seen 100 times, then ended the video with a mock toast, lifting her drink toward the camera. The caption read, "5-star prices, 1-star service." My stomach sank, not from anger, but from disappointment that felt bone deep. "How many people have seen this?" I asked quietly. Thomas sighed. "A few thousand, but it's spreading fast. Some influencer reposted it already." I stared out the window, the sound of the ocean muffled by the glass. People believe what they want to believe, I murmured. But sometimes the truth doesn't need defending. It just needs showing. He looked uncertain. Do you want me to take it down? I shook my head. No, let her have her moment. Then after a pause, I added, but I'd like to borrow the resort's account for a moment. Thomas handed me his tablet, curiosity flickering in his eyes. I opened the resort's official page where the clip had already appeared under a swirl of angry emojis and confused comments. Without hesitating, I tapped share and began to type. Every guest deserves respect, including our staff. That was all. No names, no anger, no embellishment. Just truth standing on its own 2 feet. When I hit post, Thomas raised his eyebrows slightly. That's simple. Simple things often hit the hardest, I said. For the rest of the day, I didn't check. The numbers didn't watch the storm unfold. I didn't have to. By evening, the evidence arrived at my door in whispers. Guests in the lobby, murmuring staff walking a little taller, strangers glancing at their phones with knowing smiles. One of the receptionists told me the post had reached tens of thousands of views within hours. By nightfall, the title had already started spreading online, "The Rude Guest from Hell." I caught sight of Lena only once that evening near the pool bar. She looked pale, her phone clutched tight in her hand as she scrolled through what I assumed were comments. Her voice was quieter than usual when she spoke to the bartender, and the people around her were no longer offering smiles. They were whispering. She didn't like being the spectacle. She liked being the spotlight. There's a difference. Later that night, I heard shouting echo faintly through the hallway. David's voice sharper than I'd heard it in years. I shouldn't have listened, but the words reached me all the same. You embarrassed yourself, Lena, he said. You embarrassed us. Do you even hear the way you talk to people? I was defending myself, she snapped back. They treated me like I was nothing, like I didn't belong here. Maybe that's because you don't act like you belong anywhere, he said, his voice breaking slightly at the end. Then the sound of a door slamming and silence. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hall. I opened my door just as David was passing by, suitcase in hand. His eyes were tired, his jaw tight. He stopped when he saw me, guilt flickering across his face. I can't do this right now, he said. I nodded. Sometimes walking away is the only way to be heard. He hesitated, then managed a small, weary smile. You always did have a way of saying things that sound simple but aren't. Years of practice, I said. He left without another word, disappearing down the corridor, and I stood there watching the elevator doors close behind him. My heart ached, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I'd seen that look before. The moment someone realizes they've built their whole world out of mirrors that finally shattered. I went back inside and sat by the window. Outside, the resort glowed under the night sky, calm and elegant, as if nothing had happened. But beneath the stillness, the current had shifted. People who had pitied Lena yesterday now pitied those who worked under her cruelty. Perception had turned, and there was no undoing it. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Thomas. Mrs. Wilson, he said, his tone formal, but his voice carrying the trace of a smile. We're finalizing the guest list for tomorrow night's gala. I thought you'd want to know, Mrs. Miller, your daughter-in-law has confirmed her attendance. I took a slow breath. Has she now? Yes, ma'am. Shall I reserve your seat as well? I looked out at the ocean, its surface dark and endless, and felt the smallest spark of satisfaction stir in my chest. Yes, Thomas, I said softly. I believe you should. I ended the call and sat for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the sea through the open window. The next day would not be an ordinary one, and I knew it. It wasn't excitement that stirred in me, but something steadier, deeper. Resolution. I wasn't doing this to embarrass anyone. I was doing it to reclaim something that had been taken from me. Not money, not even respect, but the truth of who I was. The afternoon of the gala arrived bright and clear. The resort glowed with polished light, every corner shimmering with glass and gold. I stood before the mirror in my suite, smoothing the soft blue fabric of my dress. It was simple, elegant, nothing like the gowns Lena favored, but it felt right. My hands shook slightly as I fastened my necklace, the same one Paul had given me on our 20th anniversary. Arthritis made small tasks harder these days, but I managed. These hands, I thought, had never failed me yet. When I stepped into the ballroom, I lingered near the back. The chandeliers hung like stars, and the air buzzed with the low hum of chatter and music. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, and a string quartet played something gentle and steady. The crowd shimmered with evening gowns and dark suits. I caught sight of Lena almost immediately. She was radiant, of course, laughing too loudly at something one of the resort's donors had said, glass of champagne poised just so. I overheard her say, "I always pick the best resorts. You can tell quality the moment you walk in." I almost smiled at that. She was still trying to perform for the world, pretending her online scandal had blown over. But there was tension in her laugh, that brittle sound of someone trying to hold a mask in place. David was there too, standing a few feet away, talking to Thomas. He looked tired, his smile polite but strained. When our eyes met across the room, he gave a small nod. One only a son would give to his mother, a quiet show of faith. As the evening went on, the lights dimmed slightly, and Thomas stepped up to the stage. He wore his best suit, his posture proud but calm. The music faded, and the murmurs died down. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we gather to celebrate Seaside Haven's continued success and to honor the spirit that built this place, not just in brick and wood, but in heart." The room quieted. Even Lena turned her attention toward him, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Thomas continued his words deliberate. This resort was once a dream on the verge of collapse. It survived because of one woman, a woman who believed that hard work could turn broken things into beauty. Tonight, we honor the woman who built this place not with money, but with her hands. The spotlight shifted. I felt it find me at the back of the room, warm and steady. Conversations stilled. Glasses froze midair. My heart thudded slow but strong. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, each sound of my heels echoing in the silence. Heads turned as I walked, whispers rippling like wind through tall grass. When I reached the stage, Thomas stepped aside, his expression soft with quiet pride. I turned to face the room. The light made it hard to see faces clearly, but I could feel every pair of eyes on me, Lena's most of all. I lifted my hands slowly, palms open. "These hands," I began, my voice steady, though my throat felt tight, "stocked grocery shelves for 20 years. They scrubbed floors until the skin cracked. They raised a son, buried a husband, and kept going when everything else in life stopped." I paused, letting the silence breathe. These hands built this resort brick by brick, even when they ached at night. I saw movement in the crowd, a hand lowering a glass too fast, a soft gasp. But I wasn't finished. I turned my gaze toward Lena. "You once told me I didn't belong on your trip," I said, not cruelly but clearly. "You said it was for your family, but here we are standing in the place I built. So tell me, Lena, whose vacation is it now?" For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then from somewhere near the front, a glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the marble floor. The sound seemed to break the spell. I heard the sharp intake of breath, the rustle of clothes as people shifted, the whisper of recognition spreading like fire through dry leaves. Lena's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Then a voice, calm and warm, broke the tension. Marilyn Ortiz, the resort's event manager, stepped forward and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "We've got you, Mrs. Miller," she said, smiling. The applause began slowly, one pair of hands, then another, until the whole room was standing. The sound rose and swelled, echoing through the chandeliers and glass. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I stood tall, letting the moment wash over me. For years, I had been invisible in plain sight. And now, here I was, not as someone's mother or widow or burden, but as myself. When the noise finally quieted, I turned slightly toward Thomas. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, voice low enough for only me to hear. It was time. I gave him a faint smile, then leaned closer. "Have them check out tomorrow," I said softly, kindly. He met my gaze, understanding the weight in my words. "Of course, Mrs. Miller," he said. As I stepped down from the stage, the crowd parted for me. The music started again, gentle and full of light. I walked back through the sea of faces, my heart steady, my hands aching, but my spirit at peace. Tonight wasn't revenge. It was recognition. And it was long overdue. I repeated those words to myself the next morning as I opened the curtains. The sunlight over Seaside Haven was soft and forgiving, painting the waves in pale gold. The air smelled of salt and fresh coffee, drifting from the breakfast patio below. The world looked calm, almost too calm, for what had unfolded the night before. I stood there for a while, hands resting on the cool windowsill, watching the ocean breathe in and out. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. But peace, I realized, is never just one thing. It's pride tangled with exhaustion, satisfaction mixed with a quiet ache of consequence. From my balcony, I could see the staff moving about the courtyard, carrying trays and linens, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Only the faint hush of whispers hinted that news of the gala had already spread. People remembered moments like that, a truth revealed so publicly, so completely, it couldn't be undone. I thought about Lena, then wondering what version of the story she was telling herself this morning. Around mid-morning, there was movement below. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of room 302's balcony door open wide, and inside, the flash of suitcases. Lena was packing. David stood beside her, folding shirts without a word. Even from a distance, I could feel the weight of that silence between them, the kind that isn't angry anymore, just tired. Shame does that. It doesn't shout. It hangs heavy, pressing down until you can't move without feeling its shape. A soft knock pulled me from the window. Room service delivering my breakfast tray. A kind young man with a polite smile placed it on the table. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" he said. "Yes," I replied. Beautiful and quiet. After he left, I sat by the table but didn't eat. My hands ached this morning, the kind of deep, stubborn pain that comes with age and too many years of labor. I rubbed my knuckles, wincing slightly as I flexed them. Even last night, standing under those bright lights, I'd felt it, the dull pulse of arthritis that reminded me that strength often wears a humble face. The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. Helen's name flashed on the screen. I smiled before I even answered. "Morning, Helen," I said. Her voice came through warm and knowing. Well, well, if it isn't the woman of the hour. The whole town's buzzing, you know. My niece saw a clip online, said you looked like a queen." I laughed softly. "Oh, I doubt that." "I don't," she said firmly. Then after a pause, her tone softened. "Tell me, Diane, was it worth it?" I looked out at the horizon, the line where the sky met the sea. Worth it? The question lingered. I thought about the years I'd spent swallowing words, staying small, keeping peace at the expense of my own dignity. Yes, I said finally. It was worth it. Dignity isn't silence, Helen. It's standing tall enough to be seen. I just forgot that for a while. Helen didn't speak right away, but I heard the emotion in her voice when she did. You didn't forget, honey. You just needed someone to remind you who you were. I'm proud of you. Thank you, I said quietly. That means more than you know. After we hung up, I took my coffee and walked down toward the shore. The sand was cool beneath my shoes, the wind soft on my face. The ocean had always been my measure for life, constant, but ever-changing, patient, but unstoppable. I found a bench near the edge of the property and sat down holding the warm mug between my palms. My fingers trembled as I rubbed them gently, easing the stiffness that had set in overnight. Pain and peace, I thought. Two sides of the same truth. I must have sat there a while, lost in the rhythm of the waves, because I didn't hear Thomas approach until his shadow crossed mine. Mrs. Miller, he said, his tone as respectful as ever. I looked up, smiling faintly. Thomas, I suppose you've survived the morning's gossip. He gave a small, knowing grin. Barely. I've had reporters calling since dawn. Everyone wants a quote from the mystery owner. I imagine they do, I said. Tell them the mystery's been solved. He chuckled, then hesitated. There's something else. Mrs. Miller Lena wants to speak with you. I turned my gaze back to the ocean. The tide had crept closer, foamy edges licking at the sand. Does she now? I asked. Yes, ma'am. She's not quite herself today. I think she's trying to understand what happened. I'm sure she is, I said softly. Understanding is rarely comfortable. Thomas nodded, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket. Would you like me to tell her you'll see her? I didn't answer right away. I traced the rim of my cup, thinking of all the things I could say and all the ones I shouldn't. Finally, I said, Tell her I'll think about it. He inclined his head. Of course. As he walked away, I stayed there, letting the sound of the sea fill the silence he left behind. I thought of Lena, her pride, her fear, her fragile need to be seen as someone she wasn't. There had been a time I might have pitied her. Now I simply hoped she was ready to look in the mirror. Back in my room, the phone rang again. I picked it up expecting Thomas, but the voice that came through stopped me cold. It was soft shaking and unfamiliar in its humility. Please. She began pausing as if gathering strength. Please. Can I see you? It was Lena. The words came out broken as if they had splintered on their way out of her throat. For a moment, I didn't answer. I just listened to the sound of her breathing on the other end. Uneven, fragile, real. It was the first time Lena had ever sounded human to me, stripped of the sharpness and polish she wore like armor. Yes, I said finally, my voice low. You can. I waited for her in the lounge by the glass windows that overlooked the sea. The morning had turned gray, the horizon hidden behind a curtain of mist. It felt fitting somehow, like the world had quieted itself for whatever was about to happen. I poured 2 cups of tea from the service tray Thomas had sent up, setting them on the small table between us. My hands ached again, but I didn't mind. There was something grounding in the pain. It reminded me that life's hardest lessons always left marks somewhere. When Lena appeared at the doorway, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who had entered my life with designer handbags and perfectly styled hair now stood there, bare-faced, her eyes swollen and rimmed with red. Her clothes were simple jeans and a soft gray sweater that looked borrowed or forgotten at the bottom of a suitcase. For the first time, she looked her age. For the first time, she looked honest. She hesitated at the threshold. May I? She asked quietly. I nodded. Of course. She crossed the room slowly, like someone walking on glass, and sat down opposite me. Her fingers twisted in her lap before she spoke. "I don't know how to start," she said, her voice trembling. "Then start with the truth," I said gently. She took a deep breath, looking down at her hands. "I grew up in a trailer park outside Columbus," she said. "My mom worked at a diner. We never had much. The kids at school laughed at my clothes, at the car she drove, at the smell of grease that clung to me after her shifts. I swore I'd never be poor again." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I thought if I dressed the part, spoke the part, married the part, maybe I could finally be enough. But the higher I climbed, the smaller I felt. It's like every time I looked around, I was still that little girl with patched-up shoes waiting for someone to notice the holes." I listened quietly, letting her words hang in the air. For years I had wondered what lived underneath her sharpness. Now I could see it, a small, frightened version of herself she'd been trying to bury under layers of polish and pride. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "When I met David, he made me feel safe. And when I met you, you made me feel exposed. I told myself it was because you judged me, but that wasn't true." She looked up then, meeting my eyes. "You reminded me of my mother. I hated that. I hated myself for it." The admission hit the air like a confession. I saw the struggle in her eyes, the shame, the sorrow, the years of pretending. "You can't build respect by hiding who you are, Lena," I said softly. "You can't climb away from the truth of yourself. It follows you no matter how high you go." Her shoulders shook as she covered her face with her hands. "I thought if I could be everything my mother wasn't, then maybe I wouldn't have to feel that fear again. But I did every single day. I was just better at hiding it." I reached across the table, resting my hand lightly on hers. "Your mother worked hard," I said. "I remember women like her. They gave the best of themselves and got the least in return. You were never meant to outrun her, Lena. You were meant to honor her." She looked at me, then eyes full of tears. "I don't know how." "Then maybe it's time you stop running from her," I said. "From who you were. From who you are. The only thing harder than forgiving others is forgiving yourself." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the ocean through the glass. I could see the tide rolling in slow and certain, as if the sea itself knew that some things take time to wash clean. Lena took a long, trembling breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "What I said to you, what I did, it was cruel. I see that now. And I see how small it made me. I'm sorry, Diane. For all of it." Her words didn't come out neatly. They broke halfway through, the way truth often does when it's finally spoken aloud. I squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking for perfect, Lena. Just honest. That's a good place to start." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. The storm outside had eased a little, the mist lifting just enough for a sliver of light to break through. It spilled across the floor between us, warm and unassuming. Lena looked at it for a moment, then at me. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, "If you'll let me try." Those words lingered long after Lena left the lounge. I sat there for a while, staring at the space she'd occupied, still feeling the warmth of the moment, fragile but real. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, scattering light across the water like it had been waiting for permission to shine. Forgiveness. I thought, is a kind of sunrise. It doesn't erase the night, but it makes the darkness bearable. The next morning, the resort buzzed with quiet energy. Guests were checking out, staff moved with the rhythm of routine, and for once, the air felt light. I walked through the courtyard, greeting familiar faces. Paula waved from the front desk, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail, confidence replacing the nervousness she once carried. Thomas stood nearby, reviewing schedules with his usual precision, but when he saw me, he smiled a small, knowing smile that reached his eyes. David was waiting for me near the cafe terrace. He looked rested, maybe even relieved. "You talked to her?" he said softly when I approached. "I did," I replied. "She's trying." He nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "Do you remember that scholarship I got for college, the one that covered my last 2 years when things were hard?" I nodded. "Of course. You never told me who it came from. That's because I didn't know he said. Until this morning." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded brochure the resort had printed years ago. On the back, under the section about community initiatives, there was a name, Hands That Build Tomorrow Fund. He looked at me with quiet wonder. "That was you, wasn't it?" I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from memories, long tucked away. "It was something your father and I started after the resort began to grow. We wanted to give people a hand, not a handout. It felt right to stay anonymous." Thomas, who had joined us by then, nodded in agreement. "Mrs. Miller created that fund herself," he said. "Every year, it's helped workers' families, students, and local businesses. She never wanted credit for it." Before I could respond, Paula walked over holding a stack of guest receipts. I didn't know that she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My mom, she was one of those people. She told me once someone paid for her nursing courses when she couldn't afford them. She said it came from something called the Hands That Build Tomorrow Fund. That was you." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "You helped her, and because of that, she helped me. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for her and for you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened as I looked at her, seeing not just her gratitude, but the line of connection that stretched from one generation of women to another. Marilyn Ortiz joined us, then her clipboard tucked under her arm. She'd been managing the gala chaos all week, but today her eyes were soft, reflective. "It wasn't just Paula's family," she said. "You helped mine too. The childcare program, the education stipend for staff, you built that here. You helped all of us." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd never thought of it as something grand. It had just seemed natural to do what I could. But standing there surrounded by them, these women who carried their families, their stories, their pride, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe legacy wasn't about ownership or recognition. Maybe it was about what continues when you're no longer there to carry it yourself. Thomas cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "you've always said this resort belonged to everyone who worked for it. I think tonight proved that more than ever." I looked at him, at Paula, at Marilyn. Their faces glowed in the soft morning light. "It was never mine alone," I said. "It was built by every person who believed in something better, even when they were tired, even when they were scared. We did it together." Paula nodded, smiling through her tears. "It's a good name," she said. Hands That Build Tomorrow. I looked down at my own hands, the faint tremor, the stiff joints that never seemed to loosen anymore. They'd been strong once, and even now, despite the pain, they were steady enough to lift others. I rubbed them gently, feeling the ache with a kind of pride. "They've built enough tomorrows," I said softly. "Now it's your turn." For a moment, no one spoke. The sound of the ocean drifted between us, calm and constant, like it had been listening all along. The air was full of something tender, something that felt like closure, or maybe continuation. Then from the edge of the courtyard, a figure approached. Mr. Blake, the resort's accountant, always formal and deliberate, held a thick sealed envelope in his hand. He looked slightly nervous as he reached us. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "I'm sorry to interrupt. This just arrived at the main office. It's addressed to you, from Paul." The sound of my husband's name stopped everything. Even the waves seemed to hush. I stared at the envelope, my heart suddenly loud in my chest. From Paul, I repeated quietly. Mr. Blake nodded. Yes, ma'am. It was part of the resort's original legal documents. I think it was meant to be delivered when the time was right. I reached out slowly, the paper cool against my fingertips. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and longing. Whatever was inside, I knew it would change everything once again. I held the envelope carefully, tracing the familiar curve of Paul's handwriting. Even after all these years, it still had the power to make me feel 20 years younger, back when life was full of struggle and hope in equal measure. The edges were slightly yellowed, the paper worn smooth from time. I sat down at my desk, my hands trembling a little, and broke the seal. The letter unfolded easily, as though it had been waiting for this very moment. I took a deep breath and began to read. To the woman whose hands built not just a resort, but a future, it began. I always knew you would find a way to turn pain into purpose. You were never afraid of hard work, never afraid of starting over. The Hands That Build Tomorrow Fund was your greatest work, though. I know you never saw it that way. You gave others the chance to build what we could not. And that is what makes you extraordinary. I had to stop for a moment, blinking away tears. I could hear his voice in every line, steady, kind, full of quiet pride. I read on. This resort shall belong to whoever restores our family's honor, not through wealth or appearances, but through kindness, patience, and love. That is our true legacy. My breath caught. I ran my thumb over his signature at the bottom. The ink faded, but strong. For a long moment, I sat there in silence, the sound of the ocean steady outside my window. Paul had always seen further than I did. He knew this wasn't just about business. It was about who we were, what kind of people we chose to be when life tested us. I smiled through my tears and whispered, "Guess I finally did." A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was David, standing there with a gentleness in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Behind him, Lena hovered, her posture small, but her expression open, uncertain. David stepped forward. "Thomas told us about the letter," he said quietly. Can we read it?" I handed it to him without a word, and they both leaned over the desk. As their eyes moved across the page, I saw their faces shift. Surprise, then emotion, then something like peace. When they finished, Lena looked at me, tears shining in her eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said softly, "but I want to earn it. You didn't just build this place, Diane. You built something inside all of us." I lost sight of what mattered, and you reminded me. Her voice cracked, and for once there was no pride in it, just sincerity. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Before I could respond, David reached for me and pulled me into a hug. It startled me how tightly he held on, how long he'd needed to. "You built us again, Mom," he said into my hair. "You built us back from the pieces." I held them both, one arm around my son, the other around the woman who had once hurt me. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it felt right. Family wasn't about never breaking, it was about choosing to rebuild over and over with the same hands that once carried the weight of the world. When I finally pulled back, I wiped at my eyes and laughed quietly. Revenge made me powerful. I said, my voice thick but sure. Forgiveness made me free. There was a stillness in the room after that, a peace that didn't need words. The sun had shifted higher, filling the office with light. It fell across the photograph of Paul that hung near the window, his smile caught forever in black and white. I looked at it and knew what I needed to do next. That afternoon, I called a staff meeting in the courtyard. Everyone gathered: Thomas, Paula, Marilyn, the cleaning staff, the gardeners, the cooks. Even guests paused to listen from the balconies. I stood before them, feeling the wind tug lightly at my dress, and spoke. This resort has always been about second chances, I began. It was built by people who refused to give up people who worked with their hands, their hearts, and their hope. It's time we pass that on. I glanced toward Paula and Marilyn, both watching intently. Starting today, I'm establishing a new program, the Second Chance Fund. It will help anyone who's lost their way find a fresh start. And it will be run by two women who understand what that means better than anyone, Paula Jenkins and Marilyn Ortiz. Applause rippled through the crowd, soft at first, then growing into something joyous. Paula covered her mouth in disbelief. Marilyn blinked hard to keep her tears from falling. I smiled at them both, my heart light in a way it hadn't been in years. The resort shimmered behind us, the sea glittering beyond. I thought of Paul, of all the years it took to arrive at this moment, and knew he would have been proud. Some legacies are written in buildings and money, but the ones that last are written in people and in the hands that build tomorrow. Those words stayed with me as the week unfolded. The courtyard of Seaside Haven filled with laughter movement and the smell of fresh paint and sea salt. Banners fluttered in the wind, announcing the launch of the Second Chance Fund. For once, there was no tension in the air, only purpose. The same people who had once looked to me for guidance now worked together side by side, building something new from what we had learned. Lena was there too, not as the woman who had once demanded attention, but as someone quietly making herself useful. I watched her help Paula arrange tables, her hair tied back, a clipboard in hand. She wasn't giving orders this time, she was listening, asking questions, learning. Every now and then, she glanced my way, not for approval, but out of gratitude. I nodded back once and she smiled, small and genuine. That was enough. Some things didn't need words. David stayed busy helping Thomas with logistics, his sleeves rolled up, his easy humor back after years of strain. Seeing him laugh again made something unclench in my chest. For so long, I had carried the weight of trying to hold our family together. Watching them now working as a team, I realized I didn't have to anymore. They were learning how to stand on their own, how to build without me holding the blueprint. As the ceremony began, the courtyard glowed with late afternoon light. The sea breeze carried the sound of applause as Paula and Marilyn took the stage to introduce the new fund. Their voices were strong and sure, filled with pride. The Second Chance Fund, Paula said, is for anyone who's made mistakes but still wants to build something better. Because that's what this place is about. Hope work and redemption. The crowd cheered, and I found myself clapping my hands, aching, but steady. When the speeches ended, people began to mingle, sharing stories and laughter. I stayed near the back, sitting beneath the shade of an old palm tree, content to watch it all. There was something beautiful about seeing everyone together. Like that, different lives, different struggles, all converging into one shared moment of hope. David found me there, a glass of lemonade in his hand. "You're hiding," he said, smiling as he handed it to me. "I'm observing," I corrected him. Mothers never really stop watching. He sat beside me, his gaze following the crowd. "You built more than a resort, Mom," he said after a moment. "You built a home. For all of us." I looked at him, at the kindness in his eyes, at the man he'd become, despite all the years I worried I'd failed him. "I just tried to keep the lights on," I said softly. "The rest of you did the building." He shook his head, smiling. "You gave us the foundation." For a while, we sat in comfortable silence, the ocean murmuring in the distance. Lena passed by, carrying a box of programs with Paula. She caught my eye again and mouthed, "Thank you." I only nodded. There were no debts left between us now, only understanding. As the evening settled, the lights along the terrace began to glow soft and golden. The music started gentle and familiar, and for a moment, I let myself close my eyes, breathing it all in. The salt air, the laughter, the peace. This was the kind of ending I never thought I'd have quiet earned and shared. Then my phone buzzed in my purse. I almost ignored it, but something in the timing made me answer. "Mrs. Miller," a man's voice said on the other end, cheerful but formal. "This is Mayor Dempsey. We'd like to honor you next month, Mrs. Miller, for your contributions to the community and Seaside Haven. Would you do us that privilege?" I looked out at the resort, the people, the sea that had seen me through every chapter of my life. My heart swelled, not with pride, but with gratitude. "Well," I said, smiling to myself, "I suppose I could make time for that." And I did. A year later, I stood once again on the terrace of Seaside Haven. But the view looked different now, not because the sea had changed, but because I had. The resort was thriving, filled with new energy and new faces. The Second Chance Fund had grown beyond what any of us expected. In 12 months, it had helped more than 40 women start small businesses, cafes, craft shops, childcare centers, even a landscaping company run by two sisters who used to clean rooms here. Every one of them had a story, and every story reminded me that sometimes the smallest acts ripple the farthest. That morning, the courtyard was decorated with soft white flowers and linen banners fluttering in the breeze. It was the fund's first anniversary celebration. Paula stood near the podium, confident and radiant, greeting guests with the ease of someone who had found her place in the world. Marilyn moved among the tables, her arm around a young woman who had just opened her first bakery with the fund's help. Watching them made me smile in a way that reached deeper than pride. It was gratitude, pure and simple. Lena and David were there too. He was holding her hand, laughing easily as they spoke to a group of volunteers. Their marriage still had its scars, but they'd both chosen to heal rather than hide. Sometimes that's all forgiveness really is, a choice you keep making, one day at a time. As the event wound down, a young reporter approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25, nervous, but determined, a microphone trembling slightly in her hand. "Mrs. Miller," she said, smiling shyly, "may I ask you one question for the paper?" "Of course," I said, motioning for her to sit. She glanced down at her notes, then looked up again. "What advice would you give to women who feel invisible? To those who think their time has passed or that no one sees them anymore?" I thought about that for a long moment. My gaze drifted to my hands resting on the table. The knuckles were swollen now, the skin lined and spotted, but I loved them more than ever. They were proof that I had lived fully, that I had worked, built, and carried more than anyone ever expected of me. I looked back at the young woman and said quietly, "Don't hide your calloused hands. They tell the story of what built your life. Every scar, every ache, every wrinkle, it's the map of where you've been. Don't be ashamed of it. Be proud. Because those hands may have done the work that made someone else's tomorrow possible." The reporter blinked quickly, smiling through a shimmer of emotion, and nodded. "That's beautiful," she whispered. As she left, I sat back and watched the ocean, the horizon stretching endlessly ahead. In the distance, the waves rolled in slow and steady, the same as they always had. Time had softened me, but it hadn't dulled me. If anything, it had made me clearer. In that quiet moment, I could almost hear Paul's voice again, gentle and teasing. "You've done enough, Diane. Rest now." But I knew I never really would. People like me don't stop building, we just find new ways to keep creating. Later, as the sun began to set and guests started to leave, I stood alone at the edge of the terrace. The lights of the resort glowed behind me, casting long, soft shadows across the sand. My reflection shimmered faintly in the window, older, but at peace. In my mind, I spoke the words I wished every woman could hear, words that had carried me through every loss and triumph. We don't lose our dignity when people look down on us, only when we start believing them. The breeze lifted, and I turned my hands over, studying them in the fading light. They weren't smooth or delicate. They were strong, imperfect, alive. I smiled, the sound of the waves folding gently around me, and whispered the truth that had taken me a lifetime to understand. These hands once cleaned rooms in the very place I now own. And that's the real luxury. And that's where my story ends, or maybe where it truly begins. Life has a way of coming full circle, doesn't it? Sometimes the very things that once made us feel small become the reasons we stand tall. I learned that dignity isn't about money or status or being invited somewhere. It's about knowing your worth, even when others don't. If my story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone in your life who never gave up, I'd love to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what your hands have built. Maybe it was a family, a home, a dream you refused to let go of. Because I believe every story, no matter how quiet, has power. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of second chances, quiet courage, and the everyday heroes among us, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's always another story waiting, another lesson hidden in the ordinary moments of life. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for remembering that kindness still matters. Until next time, take care of those hands of yours. They might just be building tomorrow.